Hey y'all, this here is the King Stewart house here in Saltville, Virginia. This is probably the oldest cabin in the valley. Best we can tell, it was built in the 1790s. Now the King part of it was built by William King, the man who founded Kingsport, Tennessee. He was a salt maker here in the late 1700s, and he built this cabin to live in, and he was shipping salt down the river to Kingsport. That's how Kingsport got started, by salt being shipped down there. Now, King worked here for several years, then he sold out. Later on, the Stewart family bought it. Now, y'all have heard of Jim Stewart, the cavalry commander of Army of Northern Virginia. His brother, William Alexander Stewart, bought this land here and owned part of the salt works. And after Jeb Stewart got killed at the Battle of Yeller Tavern, his wife and children came here and lived for several years. They didn't go back north with her family. They stayed down here with the Stewart family. They lived upstairs in this old cabin, and she taught school downstairs. And she stayed here several years until she moved on to Richmond, ran a woman's school up there in Richmond, Virginia. A lot of history in this little place. But this old house, I can still remember people living in this cabin when I was growing up. So it's been empty about 30 years now, probably.
Hidden in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia lies what many consider to be one of the most historically significant towns in the nation. The tiny community of Saltville, Virginia, with its inland saline marsh, has continuously produced salt since the 1700s. Join us now with our guest Jim Bordwine as he gives us the fascinating history of this little town.
Okay, now this here is the Sanders Salt Park here in Saltville, Virginia. This little park was put here by a man named Frank Sanders who loved Saltville history. He used to write a section in the newspaper every week. In the early 1970s, they put this park together. He moved this cabin here from up in Clinchburg, Virginia, which is about 5 or 10 miles that way. This little 2-room log cabin representative of what people would have lived in back in them days. And no bigger than it is, they might have raised 10, 15 kids in something like this. They'd slept in the loft and the floor and anywhere else they could put them. Now this little building up here next to it, that's the blacksmith shop. We have a huge anvil from the oil and chemical days in there, and just show what they had to do with back in them days. Now this structure you see up here at the end, that is called a walking beam pump. It's similar to them pumps you see out west pumping gas and oil out of the ground, but here they were used to pump the salt brine out of the ground. That's a recreation of one of the first ones that was here. At one time this valley was covered up with them pumps pumping brine out. It was a huge business for years and years. And if you can see some of these kettles you see up here in the ground, that's some of the original salt kettles that were here. They used 100-gallon kettles to boil the brine in. And at the height of production, there was like 2,800 of them kettles here being used. In 1864 alone, even though we fought 2 battles that year trying to keep the Yankees out of the valley, we produced 4 million bushels of salt, which was worth $100 million. That was 1864 dollars. All right, now this building I'm sitting next to now is a sort of recreation of one of the old salt furnaces used to be here. Now the way they made salt in them days, we would get the salty water out of the ground, and they had bullet in kettles like this. These are some of the original 100-gallon kettles that were here. And the salt furnaces were just long wooden buildings, had rows and rows of these kettles in them. Kept them going 24 hours a day. Now, for those of y'all that don't realize why salt was so important, it ain't been that long ago, we didn't have electricity up here in these mountains. And man learned a long time ago, if you'd salt meat down properly, it would not spoil. They'd salt it down, they'd kill the animals in the fall. What they couldn't eat right away, they'd salt that meat down. They'd rub salt on it and pack it on good. That salt forms a protective barrier that won't let no bugs or germs get into the meat. And that way they'd hang them up in the smokehouse to protect them from the weather and from animals. And that meat would last for a long time. They'd have something to eat through the winter time to get their protein and everything. And to show you how good salt is at preserving meat, there's a ham up in Smithfield, Virginia, that's 119 years old. They say you can still eat. And Saltville was one of the main producers of salt in this part of the country. The way it started, back during the Ice Age, there was actual saltwater springs running down the hills around here. and there's a saltwater lake down this valley. Now this water that we get out of the ground here, to show you how powerful it is, now most people swam in the ocean, you know. Ocean water is about 2.5–3% salinity level. The water we get out of the ground here is 10 times saltier than ocean water. We can average 2.5 pounds of salt per gallon of water. It's that salty. So like I say, that's what happened back in the old days. This lake was so salty, the big animals like the mammoth, the mastodon, stuff like that could smell this salt, and they'd come in here to lick the salt up from around the edge of the lake, because animals got to have salt to live just like we do. Now the hunters that followed them in here, when they first got here and realized what this was, even then man knew how important salt was. So they stayed here, and they become the tribes we know today as the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Yuchi, different ones like that. They had a huge trade kingdom going here. They would trade salt to other tribes. And our museum here in town has like certain types of seashells that were considered very valuable by them natives. They'd wear on their necklaces and stuff. The closest place they naturally occur is down around Charleston, South Carolina. We've got types of flint here that come from far west as well over Kentucky and Arkansas. It was carried in here as trade goods to buy the salt from the tribe that lived here. That went on for thousands of years until the year 1567. Spanish soldiers from a fort over in Morganton, North Carolina come over here and attacked the village, and according to their records in Seville, Spain, they killed over 1,000 natives and burnt 50 of their lodges. First thing they found was a mastodon's tooth. His dead one fence looking for salt, and they didn't know what it was. They'd never seen nothing like it. So General Campbell of Kings Mountain fame said the tooth of his friend Thomas Jefferson. Said he knew what it was. Well, they had been finding fossils of these things up in the Ohio River Valley since the 1730s. So they knew by that time it's some kind of prehistoric elephant. So that's how we found out what the bones was, the teeth here, what we were finding here. I've got mammoth and mastodon teeth that came from here. I've got part of a mammoth's lower leg bone. It's about that long. That ain't even the whole bone. I've got a backbone of a giant ground sloth. I've got a shoulder blade out of one of them things, and got the lower jawbone, part of the lower jawbone of a mastodon. That's a skeleton of a giant ground sloth. They got about 13–14 foot tall. But I've got the backbone of one, and the professor told me what it was, so it's kind of rare for this area. So. Yeah, they're talking about they're going to clone mammoth. I think they're talking about starting the truth being there for what.
All right, we here at Saltville with Diamond Jim.
That would be him. That's me.
And we just doing a little interview of the Virginia up here in Saltville, Virginia. So give us a little history here, Jim.
Well, where we're at now, this cabin behind us is a recreation of the Madam Russell cabin here in Saltville. Madam Russell was a lady who lived here in the 1700s, and she was the one who said brought the Methodists into this part of the country. Now, for y'all who don't know who Madam Russell was, she was Patrick Henry's sister. She was married to General Campbell of Kings Mountain fame the first time, and when he died, she married General Russell. So I guess she liked generals. You know, she wouldn't go for no lesser rank. But she moved here in the 1700s, and this beautiful church over here is named for her. It's a Methodist church here in Saltville. And they said back in the days that when she was living here, her sister lived over yonder, and there was one little pond in between them, and something about that pond would carry the sound. They could stand on each other's porch almost a mile apart and talk to each other. The sound would carry so good across this valley at that time. They would talk to each other from each other's porch, and Madam Russell was a big name in this country. A lot of people really thought a lot of her. But there's even some ghost stories associated with the old house used to be here that she originally lived in. People claim if children was up here misbehaving, that they would hear the sound of her dresses and bustles rustling, and she'd be coming down the steps to scold them and scare them half to death, you know. So to be such a small town, we've got a lot of history here.
Now, what's the population of this town?
It usually averages around 2,000, 2,100, something like that. It's not a big town by any stretch of the imagination. We ain't got no Walmart or McDonald's or nothing like that. In fact, if we want to go to Walmart, we got to drive 30 or 40 miles either direction just to get to a Walmart. So
well, that's a plus.
I kind of like it myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed one dollar store down here on the corner down
Dollar
here.
stores like mushrooms are popping up everywhere.
Yep.
Where the dollar store is now, there used to be a really good restaurant there in that one hotel in Saltville, and they tore all that down, built the dollar store there. So
down there where the Walgreens is, what that used to be?
Where the Walgreens is, that was where the old company store was to start with. That was a huge building. Had the grocery store and the company store in the bottom of it, sold anything you wanted. Upstairs was the hospital originally, and the morgue, the funeral home, anything you wanted, all wrapped up in one building right there. And this was a really booming town for a long time when the chemical company come here. They started out in 1892 as Matheson Alkali Works. His English company come over here and bought up the old salt works. They made salt for a few years, but around 1900, their scientists discovered by adding electricity and a few basic elements to that salty water, they could make chemicals out of it. So we had a huge chemical industry here about 70 years. They made caustic and soda and different things like that. One of the most important things I think that they made here, in the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 60s, the Air Force had a plant up here. They was leasing off the company. They was making something called hydrazine. Now, hydrazine is rocket fuel. The first man on the moon was put there by a fuel made in this little bitty town up here in the mountains of Virginia. And when I'm doing education talks at schools and such, I like to tell the kids, how cool is it Neil Armstrong stopped in my hometown for gas on his trip to the moon?
That is cool, though. I mean, it's a very beautiful little town here. I mean, what, take you 5 minutes drive around the whole town?
Yeah, it don't take long. Don't blink when you come through here, you'll miss something. But
I miss a lot. I only got one eye.
yeah, you was looking at the wrong side of the car.
Yeah.
But my family's been here since the 1760s, so it's near and dear to my heart.
Yes. We went through a cemetery through here. How many cemeteries in this little town that you know of?
Well, you got the one big one out there in town. They's family cemeteries scattered all through these hills out through here.
So there's probably a lot of little family plots.
They is. I wouldn't know. A lot of them have been lost to time. Now, there's one cemetery out here on the end of town on the original battlefield. That is the Brawley Cemetery, and that where the black folks lived here. Joseph Brawley, was the slave of William Campbell, and he was gave land out there for his service to General Campbell during the war, and that's where a lot of his family and descendants is buried at. In fact, that cemetery had been neglected for years, and a reenacting group that I was part of for a long time, we went out there and we cleaned it up, and we marked every grave we could find. The trade shop up here at the school made us a bunch of little wooden crosses. And best I remember, we found 57 graves that we marked out there.
That's good.
But that was a task, finding all the graves.
It was. Believe me, cutting that brush and getting through them briar thickets and stuff. But it was something, and I remember there was a newspaper article come out at the time said how special is it a Confederate reenacting group cleaned up this black folk cemetery and marked it and everything, so the family could find it, go out there and see it again, you know. So I've took several of the descendants out there over the years to see the cemetery. So.
And you've been in a couple different TV shows, got your own book written.
Well, I didn't write it. I talked it. If I'd wrote you, wouldn't be able to read it. I can't read my own writing. But yeah, I've got my first book out. It's a collection of local ghost stories from here around my area that have never been published before. I'm proud of that. I did a couple episodes of Mountain Men, and y'all might have seen me on there shooting at Eustis when he came after my salt. But I was also, me and my son was on an episode of a show called Food Factor Fiction on the Cooking Network one time. It was talking about salt in the Civil War. So.
All right, you talking about salt? Ain't you known as the salt man up in this area?
I am the salt man, or the salt maker. Yep. These days I can't work anymore. I got hurt and can't work no more. So I go to festivals and fairs and such, and I teach about how we made salt in the old days, why it was important, what it was used for. People don't realize how important salt was to mankind's civilization.
It's still important.
Still very important. You don't think as much about it today because everything you buy has already got salt in it. You know, but it ain't been that long ago. Our ancestors were still living out here in the mountains without electricity. There was times they was literally risking their lives to get salt.
Yeah, now we can go in the dollar store and pick up a thing of salt for $1.
That's it. You know, old Daniel Boone was making salt over in Kentucky using the same method we used here, and they got captured by the Shawnee. They was trespassing on Shawnee land, and they was going to kill him, but old Boone was a pretty smooth talker and talked them out of it. They still took him and some of them back to Chillicothe as their hostages and kept them for a while. In fact, the main chief up there at Chillicothe liked Boone so much, he adopted him as his own son, and his Shawnee name was Chatowe, which means big turtle.
Never knew that, because the town I live in, they've got Daniel Boone's home place,
Yep.
or where he lived at. He wasn't born there or nothing, but that's where he lived at.
One of the places he lived at,
Yeah.
yep.
Now, you also said that with your all's water up here, like a gallon of water, you could get how much? A pound of salt?
2.5 pounds of salt per gallon of the water that we pump out of the ground. We've had wells here since 1850 that we pull the water out of the ground with, and whenever I need to run a batch of salt, I still have access to wells we have here. So.
Oh, I thought you meant wells, like where I seen the shark sticks.
No, not that. No, W-E-L-L wells. That's like you're going to the far. You know, I get kid about my accent a lot. I don't think I got an accent, but
Well, we hillbillies.
Oh, I know I got one. Everybody kids me too.
all right. Now we're right here at the Saltville Battlefield Overlook. The first Battle of Saltville took place here in October of 1864. This big mountain you see back here behind us in the back, that's Flat Top Mountain. The Yankee Army crossed that mountain from Tazewell, Virginia, and come down the river along the old road at the time. And when you get down here, there's more or less cliffs all along the river. There was like 6,000 Yankee troops attacked us. And like I was saying earlier, we only had 1,000 old men and boys of the Home Guard here to defend it. It was a bad battle, but like I say, we pushed them out of the valley that night. But you can look right over the bank here. That's part of the original trench system that was dug here. There was over 30 miles of trenches dug around this town for the Southern defenders to be down in to fight out of.
But we're trying to do a little show here and trying to get it started out. We brought Jim on with us and trying to help us talking about his hometown. And is there anything else you'd like to say to us, Jim?
I'm just glad you boys come up today, and I invite everybody, come to Saltville and visit. To be such a small town, it's got one of the nicest museums you'll find in Southwest Virginia. All kinds of historic sites around the town dating from the war and on up through there. And then we've also got state forest and national forest right here very close to us. So there's a lot to see and do up here.
Yeah.
Plus, come see you at a festival.
Come see us at a festivals, yeah. Me and these boys do a lot of festivals and fires around, so come out and visit with us, sit and talk with us for a while. We'll guarantee we'll keep you entertained anyway.
Yes, Diamond Jim got a lot of stories he can tell you.
Oh yeah.
But y'all take care. See you on the next side.